people rise up, that is why we were able to get some kind of movement. And so I want to build more allies for this movement right now. So if any of you would like to answer that question.
Thank you for that, first of all. But I think it starts with our young people knowing that they need to speak up. Because for me, I think I was pit against a friend of mine that went together to Jeffrey the first time, and he was very good at using the manipulation to hold us there. And so I felt like I couldn't tell anybody, and I didn't tell anybody. So I think it starts with the youngest, you know, if an experience feels off, to have a young person speak out and talk to even just a friend about that, and then say to that friend, hey, is this happening to you? Then the two of them can talk to an adult, and then we're already making change because we're already taking it out of the dark. I think the secrecy was the hardest part in my own abuse, and meeting all of the survivor sisters in September absolutely changed my whole life. And so I do think if you can find community and if you can find the people who boost you, it's really important, but it starts with our youngest survivors.
Thank you so much for that. And in fact, you brought up young survivors. You know, a quick question I have for each of you is, do you believe that a child has the ability to consent to sex?
No.
Okay. Interestingly enough, most of the time our laws, whether they're state or federal, acknowledge that as well, but I have a transcript and I won't go through it, but it relates to the case that stemmed out of here where they were trying to make it seem as if a child victim was a criminal. That was the focus of their questioning. So it is so frustrating because literally when I was in the state house in Texas, this is one of the things that I actually worked on, was making sure we changed the actual language in the code, specifically as we talked about child victims. So that brings me to kind of where we are on the federal level. And I'm gonna wrap up because of the time. I wanna make sure we stay on time. My colleagues have been my colleagues are nicer than I am. I'm gonna be real. They've used words like cover up, choice. For me, it's obstruction of justice. It's real clear, and that's just the lawyer in me. This is pure obstruction. Anyone else that would engage in this type of behavior would be charged with obstruction of justice, yet somehow, because it's the Department of Justice, the ones that are supposed to enforce justice and law in this country, we're not calling it a thing, but that's what it is. And so it is my hope that we understand that while these survivors have taken the time to come out, and some of them were outed unlawfully, and absolutely need to have some semblance of justice because of that illegal outing, because our law was very clear, to be clear about that. I need people to understand that we all have a role to play. People in this moment keep asking, what is it that I can do? Well, I'm gonna be partisan as well, because they're not being partisan. The Republicans could have shown up today too. They did. So let me be clear, I am going to be full on partisan. You have to vote. If you care about this, you have to vote, and you have to understand who is fighting for you. There are certain things that were always a basic kind of standard in this country for what was right. We protected the most vulnerable amongst us. We're not doing that nowadays. We made sure that we believed in quote unquote law and order, but we're not doing that nowadays. It is time to wake up. It is time for us all to do our part because, again, I'm going to be partisan because only the Democrats decided to show up today. So with that, I will yield. And my next... Okay, they're making me skip. Okay. Well, we're going to head to Virginia. Grab some volume. It's your turn.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for being here today and thank all the people in the audience here today. And I will just say that it's because of you that we had the Epstein Files Transparency Act passed, and the president himself had to sign it into law begrudgingly while in the background trying to figure out how to break it later on. And it's because of you that we were able to issue an August subpoena led by Representative Lee, and they still haven't complied with that subpoena, but it's because of you we got that far. It's because of you that they won't even hold hearings, real hearings in the Oversight Committee on anything anymore because they're afraid we'll subpoena more people about Epstein files and Epstein Transparency Act. So just think about where you've gotten us. I know it's not enough. It may never be enough, someone mentioned before, but I just want to thank you for getting us this far. And I know there are a lot of girls and women around the country, around the world who thank you as well. One of the things that has driven me crazy is that there's millions of files that have still not been released. And so this question really is for anyone. But one of the things that I remember hearing from many of the survivors last year was you'd at least like your own files, your own witness statements. Has anyone received your own files? So no one has received their own files. And has the Trump administration talked to you about potentially giving you those files? I'm seeing everyone say no. And did they ever talk to you about which files they were withholding and why they would withhold them or consult with you about that? I'm seeing everyone shake their heads as well in the audience and all the witnesses we have today. And so I guess I would ask then, we're going to be talking to someone next week, Pam Bondi. And so do you have any suggestions on what we should ask her tomorrow? We can start off as well, anyone who'd like to answer that.
I think there's a lot to ask her, right? But do we believe anything that she's going to come out of her mouth?
Let's pretend yes.
Yeah. Okay. I definitely. Why? Who are we covering for? Like, you were willing to lose your job to cover up for these people. What do they have on you? Because I'd like to know. You're a woman. You're a mother. And you look at us, you couldn't even look at the survivors. So what's your part in this?
Can I add to that? Process. What was the process? And we would ask the same of Todd Blanche. What was the process for moving Ghislaine Maxwell?
I can actually speak to three very specific things that you should ask her. Number one, there was hours of video surveillance taken by the lead investigator at the time outside of the home, watching people go in and out of the house that has yet to be released, and we know it exists from the probable cause affidavit. Secondly, back in October of 2003, there's record evidence that there was surveillance inside the home because cash was stolen from Mr. Epstein by one of his workers, and Sarah Kellen showed police that video from inside the home. That means surveillance cameras in fact existed in the home. Where is that video? And then lastly, Maxwell photographed everything. She loved taking photographs of people. That was her passion. They have not released even a fraction of the photographs that Maxwell took.
So I'm just going to add on to Danny's point about process and be a little more specific. So what transpired in advance of the files being released were a number of the lawyers who are in this room provided DOJ with lists of names. I think one lawyer provided about 300 names, and those names got released in the first batch. Many of those names got released in the first batch of files when they were dumped. The lawyer went back and said, these names need to be redacted. I'm just going to use Danny's as an example. If that's okay, Danny. So her lawyer went back and said, redact Danny Bensky's name. The second time the files were released, the DOJ had not just the list of the names that the lawyers requested to be redacted, but also correspondence that said Danny's name was released in the first batch and a request to redact. Her name then appeared in the second batch. Another correspondence went to DOJ about Danny specifically. And then there was a third batch of documents. In the third batch of documents, I think Danny's name, her address, a picture of her dog, you name it, it was in the third batch. So I think we need to give examples, and I think we need a deep understanding of what transpired so that a group of high-powered lawyers were not able to identify names and properly redact them.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. We're going to move on to Missouri. Brett Bell.
Thank you. Before I get to my questions, I want to say something to the witnesses before us. I spent years as a prosecutor, and in cases that involved serious abuses like these, in a county that issued 8 to 10,000 cases a year, I obviously couldn't handle all of them by myself. But any case that involved serious abuses like these, I made myself available personally to the survivors. Not the prosecutor that was assigned to it. I made myself available. And if there was a resolution or an outcome to the case that went against the wishes of survivors, that was another reason that I sat right there with those survivors to hear directly from them, to tell them what the evidence was, why we were doing what we were doing. And what I discovered is that oftentimes there is nuance that an investigation may not find, that you all, or respective survivors, will see. And that was another reason that I wanted to sit down and look these individuals in the eye so that we could have these conversations and help us make the best decision in the search for justice. And so I want to ask a couple quick questions, and I'm going to be very mindful of time. Ms. Wild, as a former prosecutor, I have to ask this question. The Crime Victims' Rights Act was passed specifically to guarantee survivors a seat at the table in federal proceedings. You went to court to enforce that right. In your experience, was that promise ever actually kept?
No. That promise was never kept. And during the federal investigation, see, and that's why it was so wishy-washy, because Alex Acosta had the federal investigation. So the feds were coming to me, asking me questions, but then the feds passed it back down to the state. So it was just all very confusing. When the feds came to me and told me that there was a state sentence, I was like, oh wow, that's great. I didn't think that had anything to do with the ongoing in federal, because it's a federal term. We all know nobody, if the feds puts a case on you, they have that, like, you're going to jail. So it was just all very wishy-washy, but no, that the Crime Victims' Rights Act never applied to us in this case.
Ms. Jones, you've been fighting for justice for a long time, longer than anyone should have to. What has that fight cost you, and what keeps you going?
I'm a mother of 4 children, so that is why I fight, and I speak very loud to protect my children, and not just my children, everybody's children. That's how I keep going. It takes a very big toll on you, but when you look at the innocence in a child's face, no child should ever have to go through what we went through, ever.
And as many years as I've sat across the room from survivors, I can't pretend to fully understand the courage it takes to walk in to a room like this one, to tell the truth about what was done to you in front of cameras, in front of strangers, engaging directly with a system that has let you down. And Ms. Rosa, you said that in trying to figure out what justice looks like, good luck. And yes, we have a lot of work that we have to do to figure that out. And what that will look like, there's a lot that this investigation needs to do just that. And so what I can say with certainty is that what the inspiration for this work looks like, and I'm looking at all of you. I'm looking at every single survivor, known and unknown, that continues to inspire us to do this work. And I thank you for being here. We do not take that lightly. that you've agreed to be here today and share your stories and being honest about why this matters, because, as my colleague said, this administration has made it harder, not easier, for you to be here, but you are our inspiration, and we appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Next up is Representative Min.
Thank you to the survivors for appearing here today. Ms. Wild, Ms. Jones, Ms. Bensky, Rosa, Mr. Roberts, Ms. Roberts. Your testimonies are powerful and extremely heart-wrenching. And we're sitting right now just 2.8 miles from the Epstein estate, where so much of this took place, 4 miles from Mar-a-Lago, where Jeffrey Epstein spent so much of his time. And I don't think it's lost on any of us up here how much courage you all are showing in being here today and sharing your stories, because as we begin to unravel the threads of the Epstein files, we're seeing just how broad and deep this conspiracy goes, and a number of you have talked about the threats you face, and that must be incredibly frightening. Many of the world's richest and most powerful men are implicated, and they have directly perpetrated a decades-long cover-up. Even after we were able to pass the Epstein Files Transparency Act, over the maneuvering and objections, I'd add, of President Trump, then Attorney General Pam Bondi, and Speaker Mike Johnson, the rich and powerful were still able to pervert justice, with the DOJ refusing to turn over 50% of the documents in their possession, redacting the names of the perpetrators while releasing personal information about many of you, re-victimizing the survivors, and that's outrageous, and we for damn sure need to ask Pam Bondi what the hell happened here and why she chose to re-victimize survivors when she appears before us next week. Mr. Hirsch, Ms. Hirsch, I want to start with you real quickly. Are you aware of any instance where the DOJ contacted survivors before they released personal identifying information about the survivors last year?
The DOJ did not contact survivors directly, but we at World Without Exploitation did reach out to DOJ.
But they did not reach out.
They did return a phone call, but when we asked them to speak with survivors, that never happened.
And that's outrageous, because the DOJ is supposed to represent justice for people who are victims of crime, not re-victimizing them, not protecting the perpetrators of crime. And what's at stake today for you all and the hundreds of other women who were trafficked and abused by Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and their associates is justice for you, but also the idea that there's one rule of law for everybody. That we don't have one set of rules for the rich and powerful, the Epstein elites, and another that applies to the rest of us. As I've said before, I spent my career fighting for the rule of law. This is very important to me. I also started my career at the Securities and Exchange Commission, prosecuting corporate fraud, then taught banking law at UC Irvine, and I also know that following the money is the first rule of tracking down any kind of major criminal conspiracy. And as I just want to reiterate the points that were made earlier by Rep. Christian Murthy, by you, Ms. Roberts, that we need to follow the money, that Epstein survivors have sued and won settlements from a number of large financial institutions, including Bank of America, JP Morgan, and Deutsche Bank, hundreds of millions of dollars. We need to get the SARS reports from Treasury. We need the SEC, Treasury, and the banking regulators to investigate and potentially prosecute anyone or any institution that was complicit in covering up or helping facilitate the Epstein trafficking ring. Now, Mr. Kuban, you've stated previously that Epstein would never have been able to get away with this horrendous crimes without the complicity of banks, the big banks, and back in 2023 you stated, I've always said that he would never be able to molest these young girls without the banks and the money behind it. Could you briefly elaborate on what you meant when you said that?
Correct. So we found during our original litigation back at the inception that he was pulling out large amounts of cash and transferring funds back and forth, and large amounts of cash were coming out of the banks. There were never any questions that were being asked of him at the time. And in fact, as I alluded to before, even back in 2003, he had envelopes filled with cash that he even reported to police that had been stolen from his home. And the banks appeared to be working with him, not questioning him, because of all of the money he was moving through those institutions.
It is a damn shame that the Department of Justice and the FBI have never followed this thread, even though it's something that is very, very important. I will just add that House Oversight Democrats have worked with Chairman Comer to issue subpoenas for Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan, but we're seeking subpoenas for an additional 21 banks. I think this is going to be really, really important. Another important piece of evidence that has not been followed up on is the camera evidence, the computer files, as the lead attorney at the time, Maria Villafuena, had referred to. Now, you had mentioned, Mr. Kubin, that you saw a number of cameras in the estate. That would potentially have a lot of damning footage. Can you describe what cameras you saw, how many, where they were located in the estate?
Right. So after we originally filed the first case here in Palm Beach for one of the victims, I was granted an opportunity by the court to go on property at Epstein's home and do a site inspection. There were spots within the home, both in the bedrooms and the massage area and other areas of the home, where you could see mounting brackets where cameras used to be. And then there were CPU or computer units that had been taken away. And then I was able to verify back in 2003, as I said, that Sarah Kellen had actually shown internal footage to the police department back then of someone that had allegedly taken money. So there was verifiable evidence that cameras were in fact in the home. Lastly, I represented a client in Manhattan who, when she was brought to the home in Manhattan, saw the entire network of cameras that was being utilized in the Manhattan mansion. None of that video has been released today.
And in fact, lead attorney, I'll just close with this, Maria Villafuena had said that that was a smoking gun, this evidence. They knew exactly where it was, and Alex Acosta, who was then the U.S. Attorney for the District of Florida, refused to investigate this or actually seek to have this turned over. I want to thank you all again. Thank you for your courage in being here today.
Thank you, Congressman. Next is Representative Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, and thank you to each of you for being here today. I especially want to thank those of you who shared your stories about surviving unimaginable abuse. We thank you for your immense bravery, which we do over and over again, but also for your willingness to relive your trauma in pursuit of justice. I know you've waited far too long and are still waiting, but from the bottom of my heart, please know that you are seen and heard by every member of Congress in this room, and we will make sure that your stories are not ignored. Former Attorney General Bondi literally kept her back turned away from a room full of survivors. We've seen the photo. We are here to do the opposite. We are here to walk alongside you and to shine a light on the stories that you have shared over and over. We'll keep fighting for truth, for transparency, and an end to this shameless DOJ cover-up of all the information relating to the heinous crimes of this Epstein case. DOJ's document productions to date have released very little new information about Epstein's co-conspirators. In fact, we know that there are more than 2.5 million documents still hidden, but unfortunately, as we have heard today, recent releases have exposed private and personal identifying information of survivors. DOJ has created serious risk to safety for survivors and published names and photographs, some of them very explicit. Survivors have also shared with the committee that in multiple instances, as we heard again today, loved ones didn't know that you had been abused by Epstein until that information was released publicly. Every oversight Democrat sent Pam Bondi a letter back in February to express alarm at DOJ for publishing survivor names and photographs thousands of times, while taking special care to redact information that could be crucial for bringing justice and holding perpetrators of abuse accountable. The sheer amount of personal identifiable information released after survivors got assurances from DOJ that they would be protected raises the question of whether this is just incompetence or, far more likely, deliberate witness intimidation. Ms. Bensky, you have spoken about this, about the harm of DOJ's sloppy Epstein file release that has caused you and other survivors. You spoke about your own name being released despite repeated requests to redact it. Will you share again for us, for the record, what that experience meant to you and other survivors to have your information be exposed?
Yeah, I mean, I am public, and that's a choice that I made, but never in my life did I expect for anybody to read intimate details of abuse. To me, it's always been about protecting others. And, you know, unfortunately, I have friends in this story, and to see somebody's name out there who has worked so hard to move past this in life is something, it sends a shockwave through your body. It hits you like reading your own name in the file first. Just like I went into the files thinking I would have to look pretty hard to find things, type my last name in, and everything came up, right? And it's like, there's like a hot flash moment, right? It hits you sort of like a bullet to the chest where you're like, oh my God, it's that feeling of like that PTSD is real, right? So the PTSD of the trauma that I endured definitely came back, and then you're reading on, and then you see more, and you see survivors being outed, a survivor that I had said, don't ever worry, you've always been a Jane Doe. So, and to feel the impact of that is something that I will carry forever.
I'm sorry. I feel like you deserve an apology from your government, and as Democratic members of Congress, we are here to continue to work with you. But I also know that we absolutely have to fight for better. We have to fight to pass Virginia's law, and I know Congresswoman Frankel wanted us to share that she's also been working on the Courtney Wild Reinforcing Crime Victims' Rights Act to ensure that those rights that you are owed are actually upheld, that we work with survivors to inform you about any prosecutorial agreements, to ensure that folks know what rights you are awarded and deserved. And we will continue to investigate and to fight for all of you, but also for every survivor and every young person who is being victimized around the world. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Representative Ansari.
Thank you, Ranking Member. President Trump, former Attorney General Pam Bondi, and Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche promised truth and transparency regarding the Epstein files. They have instead led the most egregious cover-up in American history. Despite their public assurances, Pam Bondi released Epstein files at an excruciatingly slow pace, and when she did, as we heard in powerful testimony today, protected the names of rich and powerful men who committed the crimes while revealing the identities of survivors. In March of 2026, the DOJ admitted that it withheld almost 48,000 files from public release, including allegations against President Trump. The Trump-Epstein administration continues to try to cover it up to this day. President Trump has said most recently that we should stop wasting time and energy on the Epstein files. He's called the fight for the release of the files and transparency, and I quote, a hoax. Abuse and trafficking of thousands of minors is not a hoax. Abuse and sexual exploitation of women is not a hoax. Survivors deserve the truth, and the American public deserves the truth. Ms. Jones, you have said that you, and I quote, put your hope in President Donald Trump and that you believe that he would do right by the survivors. Now, do you believe that he has broken his promise?
He's broken many promises.
Thank you. I want to remind everyone that former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene alleges that during a phone call, President Trump told her that if he was to release the Epstein files, and I quote, my friends are going to get hurt. And now the Trump Department of Justice that is responsible for overseeing the release of the Epstein files claims that there is nothing more to investigate in the Epstein case. Todd Blanche met with Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's accomplice, before moving her to a cushy, minimal security prison. It is so ridiculous and insulting. So far, only Epstein and Maxwell have been prosecuted for sex trafficking, and there has never been a full accounting of Epstein's financial crimes or additional prosecutions of suspected co-conspirators. Last month, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche said, and I quote, from the information that we have within the Epstein files, we do not have a case against anybody. Ms. Jones, based on your experience or based on what you have seen in the files, do you believe the statement to be true?
Absolutely not.
Ms. Bensky, based on your own experiences or what you have seen in the files, do you believe the statement to be true?
No.
Ms. Wild, I'd like to ask you the same question.
No.
And Rosa, lastly, I'd like to ask you the same.
No.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'd like to now have Representative Walkinshaw.
Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you all for being here. Walking into this room and telling your stories again takes tremendous courage. And I've heard a lot of the stories from survivors, and like everybody, I'm struck by the courage, the commitment to justice for Epstein, Maxwell, and everyone involved in these crimes, but I'm most struck by your commitment to protecting every child and every potential victim of sexual abuse or assault. Epstein, Maxwell, and their co-conspirators shattered lives. They targeted vulnerable women and girls, objectifying and attempting to silence them. They were protected by their wealth, their power, their privilege. We can see it here in Palm Beach. And as we've heard today, their ability to commit these crimes reflects a systemic and intentional failure by the very institutions meant to protect you. Our government lets you down when you deserve protection and justice for the crimes that were committed against you. And we're here today to try to do our part to correct some of these failures. And we're not going to stop until the truth comes out, the extent of the crimes, the involvement of all of the co-conspirators is revealed. I want to focus on two patterns that have emerged today. First, Epstein and Maxwell weaponizing immigration status and travel documents against survivors, confiscating passports, holding visas hostage to trap women and girls in their orbit. And then when survivors like yourselves were brave enough to speak up, our justice system ignoring you, reinforcing the sense that there was nowhere safe for you to turn. Rosa, Ms. Wild, thank you for being here today. I want to ask you both just a couple questions related to these patterns. Rosa, can you tell us again how Epstein used your visa status as leverage to keep you under his control?
O1 visa is a visa for an individual with extraordinary abilities, and it takes a lot of documents to obtain that visa. I have helped one individual to obtain similar visa, and I learned the amount of documents needed to be gathered. Looking back at my case now, I did not have documents to obtain that visa. I am 100% sure of that. My agency being able to obtain that visa for me in such a short time, which was less than 6 months, it's a miracle. You try to do that right now, you won't be able to. I want to know how. And it's impossible. So I knew that my visa was linked to him, and if he is unpleased, I would be sent back.
And are you aware of Epstein using similar tactics against other women or girls?
I have personally met a foreigner girl at his mansion in West Palm Beach, and I have personally not seen a foreigner come forward to tell the story, and I hope my case will bring more people out in front, because there are many other people who speak broken English or don't speak English at all who can tell their stories.
Thank you. Ms. Wild, you were 14 as you testified when you first encountered Mr. Epstein. Is this you?
Yes.
A child?
Yes.
I just want to go back to the DOJ investigation and the sweetheart deal for Epstein and ask you, were you told by the Department of Justice that your case was still being investigated even after Alex Acosta signed off on Epstein's plea deal?
Yes, they sent me a paper in the mail, my attorneys have it, that saying it was going to be a lengthy process and that, you know, they were doing everything that they could to put him away. But at that time, when the letter was dated, it had already been signed, the non-prosecution agreement.
You learned later that they had already signed the deal.
Yes.
So that letter they sent you was a lie. They lied to you.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you both. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman. Next up is Representative Presley.
Thank you to Congresswoman Lois Frankel. Thank you to Ranking Member Garcia, to Congresswoman Summer Lee. Your efforts made today possible, and of course, thanks to our courageous survivors. I've been on this committee since I was a freshman, and Elijah Cummings, the great Elijah Cummings, our chair at the time, would often remind us that the role of the Committee on Oversight, our mandate, is to be an efficient and effective pursuit of the truth. Now, that pursuit is what brings House Democrats here today. Because instead of Epstein's victims being met with efficiency, they've been met with obstruction and delays by law enforcement and by the Department of Justice. Instead of Epstein's victims being met with effectiveness, they've been met with systemic cover-up. And I would add cowardice of those who were intimidated by the power and the privilege of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and their co-conspirators. So today, we are here to shine a light, because sunlight is the best disinfectant. We are here to shine a light on the corruption, on the failures of this investigation. But most of all, we are here to center the survivors, to center the courageous. Survivors who are grown women before you, but who were children. Children whose innocence was corrupted, whose bodies were violated, whose dreams were destroyed, whose lives were irrevocably changed. Maria, Courtney, Jenalisa, Danny, Rosa, and Sky and Amanda, here for Virginia, we thank you. Congress enacted the Crime Victims' Rights Act in 2004 to mandate specific obligations for the Department of Justice to ensure that survivors are protected, informed, and able to heal. Now, Mr. Kubin, you've spent decades representing survivors and fighting for transparency around the federal government's handling of their cases. Can you speak to how the federal government violated, after their bodies were violated, after their dreams, their dignity, their lives were violated, how were their rights violated?
It was our understanding after the release of documents and the bravery of Ms. Wild here at the end in her case that was brought and the final disclosure of all those documents, it showed that the federal government and the state attorney's office colluded together to not bring an indictment because they knew that if they did, then the Crime Victims' Rights Act would then be triggered and they would have to inform the victims of what they were doing. So what we learned was they intentionally kept it out of the hands of victims so that the victims couldn't object or have any say in the process by secretly doing this deal that they did. And the federal judge, very brave federal judge Mara, found that there was a violation of the act here in the Southern District. And unfortunately, because of the way the law was written, there was absolutely no way to get them any justice or any remedy as a result.
That's right. So they weren't notified, they were not consulted, they were not given the opportunity to participate in proceedings that directly affected their lives and their safety. These rights are supposed to be guaranteed by the Crime Victims' Rights Act. Now, would any survivors like to speak to any examples to share about how the federal government ignored or neglected your case? I see the clock is ticking here. Would anyone else like to speak to that? How about this? Let me just say this as a survivor myself. I know that this is not only about your safety that you were robbed of, your innocence and your dreams. Survivors are also forced to carry the financial burden of abuse. Lost wages, housing instability, medical expenses, legal fees, security costs, trauma that impacts your daily life. Could any of you speak to that?
We have put ourselves on the front line and spoke out and put our face to the public when we should have never had to. And that comes with a huge toll. Now every job that we apply for, they Google us. They know our most personal information of things that happened to us as children. That is forever, forever going to follow us. We don't get that back. We don't get that luxury. So that is just the one of the most important things that comes with the weight of this. All because the government couldn't do their job.
May I heard this before from the survivors. I'm a really cool person if you meet me outside of here. I have a life stories, but these release of documents made me something else. And I can't do daily task without certain help. And I have a support system and I'm grateful for it. But if I didn't, I don't think I would be here today alive. So it's really hard. I want to tell the world, like, it's hard to be here today. I'm very uncomfortable. I'm trying to look like I'm okay, but I'm not okay.
Yes, would anyone else like to speak to the financial burden of abuse, lost wages, housing instability, medical expenses, legal fees, security costs?
So I was gonna, when I was younger, when I met Jeffrey, I experienced a lot of homelessness. So I think I misunderstood your question, but
Oh, no, say whatever you would like.
Yes, ma'am. I was just gonna say that, you know, just like you were walking over the bridge, you know, a 14-year-old going to Palm Beach, it was like, as soon as you go over that bridge, you just feel the money and power, and it's just such a contrast. If you go down Okeechobee to Okeechobee and the Turnpike, there's a road called Drexel, and it's a mobile home street. There's a lot of, that's where I came, that's where I was from. So to go from here to there is just, you know, it's so confusing. I was homeless. My parents had addiction problems. You know, he prayed. He knew what he was doing. It was all very calculated, you know. And then later on, the fact that he used those things against me. We had the feds pulling up our MySpaces, treating us like criminals because we were at a party at 16 and 17 drinking, you know, rather than going out. They had. So for me, it's just, it's so sad that he knew who he preyed on. He preyed on young, especially in Palm Beach County, he preyed on us kids who came from troubled backgrounds and everything else, and they portrayed us as these underage prostitutes. Which is that a real charge? Is it? Like, what was the statute number? I'm on his charge that he took. Spencer should, right? Is that a real charge?
It was bizarre to us even at the time, but you know, it made absolutely no sense, and the statutory guidance was very questionable given that they were minors. But speaking to Representative's question specifically and representing survivors over the last 30 years now, you know, it affects not just the survivor, it affects their family, it affects the way they raise their own children if they have daughters. It affects their mental stability and ability to maintain employment. You know, try telling a survivor they've got to pay a lawyer for 20 years straight if they want to get justice. It's impossible, especially with a law that doesn't provide any remedy. So they've got to seek out victims advocates that are willing to do it for free. And there aren't many of those, especially none that want to do it for 20 plus years to fight. So the financial ramifications of being a victim, especially of somebody with unlimited resources, is dramatic.
Can I add to that? I think also to continue this fight, like, we're all here right now, and this isn't the only thing I'm sure we're all doing this week to talk about getting the messaging out. Advocacy is expensive, therapy and healing is expensive, you know, and there's no time to work because honestly, we got to change it for our kids because I don't want to raise my kid in a world like this right now. So,
yeah, I'll just close out with one point to Courtney to your question about these prostitution charges. We need to eliminate the prostitution charges from the books altogether. We absolutely should be holding sex buyers accountable for the harm they cause, but people in prostitution should not be criminalized for being in prostitution, because the vast majority of them are not there by choice. They're there because of lack of circumstances, poverty, other vulnerabilities. And what we see so often is that traffickers deliberately use that notion that the women and girls will be arrested for prostitution as a tactic. It is the #1 tactic in order to make sure that survivors, victims are too terrified and too traumatized to talk. So we've got a lot of work to do.
And I just want to, again, I thank you all, and thank you for being prescriptive with a number of the legislative responses to address these systemic harms. I'll just say that there is no amount of compensation that could ever fully account for what was stolen, but every single survivor certainly deserves much more than sympathy. And that is the work that I'm committed to doing alongside of you legislatively. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'd like to turn it over now to Representative Frankel.
Thank you. Thank you again for being here. Let me just start with Courtney. You and I met many, many years ago. And just to let you know, I took for heart what you said. And myself and colleagues, Democratic Women's Caucus, we have filed a bill many years in a row named after you to make sure we can get these rights that you talked about. And the Courtney Wild bill would assert that the victims of federal crimes are entitled to all the rights guaranteed under the original Crime Victim Rights Act, regardless of if the charges are filed in court. And then it lists out a whole set of criteria. So I want to thank you for your bravery. We're still trying to get that bill passed. It's a little difficult under the circumstances, but we're going to keep trying. And thank you so much for your persistence. Yes. Now, I want to tell everybody, I don't think I was able to tell you exactly why it took so long to have this hearing in Palm Beach County, because I think many of us always believe there are 3 witnesses who have been missing, who must be asked the question, why did Jeffrey Epstein get the deal that he got, and why were the survivors so mistreated in the grand jury room? And those people are Barry Krischer, who was the state attorney, Lana Levick, I don't know if I'm saying that name right, she was one of the prosecutors in that grand jury, and Mary Ann Dugan, who was one of the prosecutors. I've requested for many years that those people be subpoenaed. We almost had an opportunity. In 2019, Karen Maloney was the chair.
We're going to start in just a minute here. Okay, well, thank you. My name is Robert Garcia. I'm the ranking member of the Oversight Committee. Of course, I'm here with members of the Oversight Committee on Democrats that are clearly focused today on the survivors and accountability, truth, and justice. We're going to hear from some of our committee members here in just a second. I want to just give some thoughts and then answer any questions. Now, we're here in Palm Beach County because so much of this investigation brings us back to this location. We know that the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, the horrible things that happened to so many women and girls, totaling 1,200, could have been stopped and halted had authorities here been listened to, had prosecutors made recommendations to the U.S. Attorney, had been listened to, had survivors been listened to, but time and time again, whether it was at the law enforcement level or whether it was at the U.S. Attorney's Office by Alex Acosta and others, that justice was denied and survivors did not receive justice. We know that that led to the additional abuse and trafficking of women and girls, including of Rosa, who you heard from today. And you heard her horrific story, and had folks listened, that would not have happened to her and to so many others. We also want to be clear that, especially after today, we want to hear and are demanding to hear from the line prosecutors and law enforcement officials that made some recommendations to prosecute additional names, to go after co-conspirators, and yet were denied those charges, and that evidence was pushed back because of decisions made by the U.S. Attorney at the time, Alex Acosta. Now, we've talked to Mr. Acosta in the past, and we have additional questions. And I think it's important for anyone that was involved in the case here in Palm Beach to know that while we have reached out to some folks to speak to us voluntarily, you will be compelled to answer questions when Democrats are in the majority. If you were involved in this case and tried to do the right thing and made recommendations to the U.S. Attorney to bring prosecutions, we encourage you to testify and to bring your information to the committee. But if you're unwilling to do so, we are going to compel that testimony, because those survivors deserve to understand who and why decisions were made to not move forward with prosecutions that then led to the abuse of so many more women and girls. I'll also say that I want to reiterate to the Attorney General that we expect to see her in front of our committee in just a couple of weeks, and that we expect Republicans and James Comer, because it's his decision alone, to ensure that that testimony is recorded under oath and released to the American public. The survivors deserve nothing less, and I want to again thank them for their courage today to provide testimony under oath. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Representative Frankel, who of course hosted us here today.
Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Garcia and my colleagues. I've been trying to get this hearing here for many years, and I thank you so much for finally bringing folks here. Because, folks, so much of the truth lies here, hidden in Palm Beach County, and we still have yet, under oath, heard from some of the key players. Barry Krischer, who was state attorney at the time, the two prosecutors he sent in to a grand jury room to debase our survivors. We need to hear from them, and I can give you another list of associates, law enforcement, state attorney employees who have some of the answers to the big question is, why did Epstein get such a slap on the wrist? Secondly, to Courtney Wild, a bill has been filed actually numerous times to deal with her concern that the survivors were not given notice of the plea and had any opportunity to weigh into that. And I'm just going to end by saying this, because what makes this so tragic and sad is how many lives could have been spared the agony of abuse had the prosecutors in Palm Beach County acted properly, or had they not been overpowered, I should say, overpowered by Jeffrey Epstein and his team of lawyers, politicians, business people, whoever, who obviously overpowered our justice system. And with that, again, thank you. Where are you? Thank you so much for bringing us here, and all of you for your attention. I yield back.
So, you know, we're here at ground zero for where Epstein's crimes occurred. Crimes that were moral crimes, civil crimes, criminal crimes, crimes that I would consider really against humanity, given the systemic harm caused by really what was a global enterprise of trafficking girls. Impossible for me to not think about my own 17-year-old daughter. Again, you see grown women before you who are courageous in their refusal to be silent, but they were mere girls, 14, 15, 16, 17, talented artists, dancers, aspiring teachers, lawyers, models. Their bodies were violated, their dreams devastated, their lives irreparably harmed. When you are violated in such a way as a child, it changes on a very foundational and deep level who you are forever. Your ability to love, to receive love. But it's not only an emotional toll, and certainly the cost of trauma is a high one. But there are also economic expenses, an inability to pursue a job, to keep a job, 20 years of, 30 years, 3 decades of legal fees that no one was counting on. And not only was their innocence corrupted, and their bodies violated, and their lives changed, their very rights were violated. The Crime Victims' Rights Act grants individuals who are victims of federal crimes specific enforceable rights, including protection from the accused, reasonable, accurate, and timely notice of public proceedings, and the right to be heard. It ensures victims are treated with fairness, dignity, and respect. Well, that did not happen. Their rights were violated. And I'm working closely with survivors for a legislative fix of restorative justice. That's what brings us here today, to learn from the survivors, to identify failures, to hold predators and abusers accountable. And although I commend the survivors for their courage, I look forward to a day where survivors do not have to relive their trauma in order to compel action from their government. And finally, although this is a fight specifically for justice, accountability, and healing for our survivors who deserve so much more than sympathy, which is why I'm seeking to advance a legislative restorative justice fix to acknowledge the economic abuse and financial hardship that many of them still carry today. But this is a fight for all survivors that are victims of sexual assault and human trafficking. And so for that, to ensure that there is no erasure, I want to acknowledge the incredible work of Tarana Burke of the Me Too movement, Amber Tamblyn, and many more, and in my own district of the Massachusetts 7th, My Life, My Choice, and the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center. This is a fight for all survivors.
Good afternoon. I'm Melanie Stansbury, and I am very deeply proud to represent New Mexico's 1st Congressional District and to be part of a state delegation in New Mexico that is seeking to turn the Epstein files into Epstein trials. As we stand here today, New Mexico is the first and only state to pass a state law to investigate this case. And what I think is extraordinary about today, and I want to acknowledge Congresswoman Frankel, is that this is the first congressional hearing on this case to ever be held in West Palm Beach. Think about that. The first criminal allegation against Jeffrey Epstein happened more than 25 years ago in this community. Police looked the other way. Your state Attorney General looked the other way. Our national and federal attorney generals and investigatory bodies looked the other way. The FBI had gobs of evidence that there were criminal enterprises going on here in this community that included the exploitation of children, the trafficking of children across state lines, international trafficking of children and women, and financial crimes. And over the last 2.5 decades, not a single congressional hearing has been held on this case here in this community where it all started. And so I want to say thank you to Congresswoman Frankel and to our soon-to-be chair of the Oversight Committee, because we would not be here if it were not for them and for the survivors who were brave enough to show up today and to tell their stories on camera for the world to hear. Now, I just want to say this as I close out my comments. There are lots of discussions about the failure of the system to hold Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and the potentially dozens of men who exploited young girls and trafficked and participated in the sexual exploitation of survivors. But this was not an isolated incident of failures of a system. This is a system that was designed to exploit children. It was a system that protected the wealthy and powerful, and it was a system that intentionally chose not to prosecute Jeffrey Epstein under federal law, which enabled him to commit potentially hundreds of other cases of rape, abuse, grooming, and transnational sex trafficking. That is not just system failure. That is a system that was designed to enable rich and powerful people to get away with anything that they wanted. And so we're here today to make sure that the voices of survivors, that the stories of survivors are heard not just in this community, but across the world, and to make sure that we take on that system directly. To say we are not going to stand for this one more moment, and to end the injustices that have allowed this to happen in this community, and communities all across the country. And so we demand accountability. We demand action. We demand that Pam Bondi show up for her deposition. We demand that Donald Trump release the Epstein files. We demand that Todd Blanche actually prosecute these crimes. And we demand accountability for every single perpetrator that is still out there. We are coming for you.
All right, okay.
I'm Emily Randall. I represent Washington State's 6th District, and I had been moved over and over and over by the stories of such brave women who are forced by a system of power to relive their trauma over and over and over in pursuit of justice. And what I hear from my neighbors, and I know that my colleagues hear from the American people across the country, is that this case isn't only about survivors of Epstein's trafficking and sexual crimes, but it is about survivors everywhere who finally feel a little bit of hope that their stories will be listened to and that they will be able to imagine a future in which there is justice. But we're not there yet, because we still are experiencing a Department of Justice that is engaging in a massive cover-up. 2.5 million documents still unreleased in this Epstein investigation. And yet, the release over and over and over again, thousands of times, of the names and personally identifying information of survivors. There's nothing else to call that but witness intimidation, because it cannot be accidental, the number of times that co-conspirators and powerful men have their names redacted in the files and survivors' names are unredacted. No matter how many times they have asked for that privacy and protection, no matter how many women testified under the understanding that they would be identified as Jane Doe, we are seeing information about survivors who have already been traumatized over and over and over again be released as part of this cover-up and part of this intimidation strategy. We are going to continue to fight so that those who are actually culpable, the dozens, hundreds of people who are actually culpable, have their day in the sunlight, that we record their testimony, that we investigate this to the full extent, and we are committed every day to working alongside the survivors to ensure that they are protected to the best of our abilities.
Hi everyone, Yasmin Ansari, Congresswoman from Arizona's 3rd District. I was a child just a few years younger than many of the women who testified today when Jeffrey Epstein was carrying out his heinous crimes right here in West Palm Beach. These women were girls at the time, over 1,000 girls. Girls who should have been protected, but girls who were failed by adults, by institutions, and by their government. And what happened here in West Palm Beach and across the country and across the world was not simply just about the evil of one man. It was a systemic failure that was shaped by inequality, by influence, and by impunity. All of this has been exacerbated by the most corrupt administration in American history, carrying out the most egregious cover-up in American history. And this systemic failure requires systemic solutions. In the minority, oversight Democrats, led by Ranking Member Garcia, have forced everything that has gotten us to this point today. We would not be here if it were not for Democrats on the Oversight Committee pushing every subpoena, pushing for these depositions, pushing for these transcribed interviews, pushing for Pam Bondi to come before the Oversight Committee. This has been an egregious cover-up by the Trump administration, but also a complete abdication of responsibility by Republicans on the Oversight Committee, barring a few, and by Republican Chairman James Comer. And we will continue, whether now or when we are in the majority, to make sure that every single person who enabled, who perpetrated, or who covered up these heinous crimes will be held accountable. And we know from what we heard from the women today, and we've known this, it's in the files, that there are rich and powerful men out there right now continuing to live their lives without any consequences. And we assure you that day will end.
Good afternoon, I'm James Walkinshaw from Virginia's 11th District. We're here today in Palm Beach County, ground zero, the center, the place where Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's massive child sex trafficking ring started. We're just miles from Mar-a-Lago, the place where the close friendship between Epstein and Donald Trump grew, where Virginia Giuffre was trafficked and later raped by Jeffrey Epstein. And we heard today powerful stories from survivors, including Rosa from Uzbekistan, who was recruited and held hostage by the visa that Epstein controlled. Powerful stories. And I hope the world was watching. I specifically hope that Alex Acosta was watching, because we learned today from Rosa that she was raped time after time after time by Jeffrey Epstein while he was serving the sweetheart deal sentence that Alex Acosta gave him. While he was on unsupervised, very unsupervised release, he was continuing to commit the very crimes that women like Maria Farmer and others brought to the attention of the FBI decades ago. I hope another person was watching today. I hope Pam Bondi was watching. And I hope she saw the courage of the survivors here today who told their stories, in most cases, again, in front of all the cameras, with all of the bright lights for the world to see. And I hope Pam Bondi will feel some shame for the fact that she has tried time after time after time to avoid public accountability. She wants to answer questions behind closed doors, in private, where the world can't see it, with no video. Well, Pam Bondi, that is not good enough. That is not good enough. You need to show 1 ounce of the courage that the women here today showed. They deserve your public testimony on video. The American people deserve it too. I'll go back to the ranking member.
Thank you. We're going to open up for a couple questions. Before I do, I want to say a couple important things to close. Number one, I hope today reminds the public that this investigation is not a hoax, and it's not over, and that unlike Todd Blanche, the acting AG, who just a week ago said that the DOJ was moving on from the Epstein investigation, we understand that it is alive and well and moving forward, and we have a lot of work to do ahead of us. And the second thing is, for this community, it's important for the folks of Palm Beach County, Palm Beach, West Palm Beach to understand and to know that there's a lot of folks that worked for law enforcement, that were lawyers involved in this case, that were investigators, or that have heard stories or know information or evidence that we want to access. So I encourage anyone from the Palm Beach community that we have information about Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, the crimes, or the cover-ups that happened, to please contact the Oversight Committee. We have a protected system, a whistleblower system, that we encourage you to please access if you have information that could help us in our investigation. And with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
Your last interview now as a committee is scheduled for July 15th. Do you expect that there will be more before the election? How many and who, by name if you can, do each of you most want to hear from as your investigation continues?
Look, we're working right now through a list of additional subpoenas that we want to get through. Some we're communicating directly with the majority on, so we're waiting to see if they move on those or not. But I think it's safe to say that we're interested in speaking to anyone that was involved, particularly prosecutors that were involved in making recommendations about the Sweetheart deal, what happened here in Palm Beach, and more broadly in some of the other cases that were brought forward to the government. That's one piece of folks we want to speak to. We also have additional questions for other folks that we believe were involved in assisting Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Some of those you and I discussed earlier, but we're not at this moment ready to release additional names.
Tara Monahan, the Red Letter. If you win back the House in November, will you bring back the people that were already called in to testify, since they testified behind closed doors, there were no cameras, there's no transparency? Will you bring the survivors back so that they can actually be reported into the Congressional Library on the record? And who else do you plan to call? And will you call anyone from your own party?
So let me add, one is obviously as it relates to survivors, we're never going to force a survivor to be compelled to speak in front of the committee, but any survivor that wants to speak and have the opportunity, absolutely. And we definitely have additional questions for folks that we've talked to. I'll take Alex Acosta as a very good example. We'll definitely have additional questions. As far as members from our party, we have been nonpartisan in our approach. We don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. We'll talk to you. And I think we said earlier that we have additional questions. I want to understand why Merrick Garland in the former Justice Department, under the Biden administration, did little to nothing to bring justice for the survivors or have additional prosecutions. And so Merrick Garland, for me, is at the top of that list of folks that we need to speak to and ask questions of.
What about Bill Burns?
And I think there are a variety of other folks, and if anyone else wants to add to that, there's a variety of other folks we want to speak with. Yes.
Yes, Representative Garcia, Dave Bowman, WPTV. It was hailed as a victory when the bill passed the House where the files were going to be released. And yet you heard today that while a few reputations have been taken of individuals and people abroad have been investigated, that the names of the survivors came out. What do you do moving forward to try to prevent that? And to get names of the perpetrators released when your own survivors today said they don't have a lot of confidence in that situation?
I mean, I put the blame squarely on former Attorney General Pam Bondi for that. She has had a direct hand in this cover-up from the beginning. Not only did they move slowly, but they were sloppy. We heard from survivors, as you mentioned, that their lives have been destroyed while names of men and co-conspirators who committed the crimes were redacted. So I think that there needs to be that's why we need to hear from Pam Bondi at the end of this month, under oath, on camera in front of the American people, because she is to blame for this, and there should be, I believe, accountability for her and for what she did here. She has ruined lives. I mean, we heard such devastating stories today about people's children hearing these stories for the first time, women whose details of their sexual assault and abuse was revealed because of the botching of these files, the law was very clear that any personally identifiable information as it pertains to survivors should have been redacted. This is not an accident. The Department of Justice chose to do this because they want to silence people. They want this to go away. Donald Trump has made that abundantly clear. He's directed his staff to make sure that happens, and I believe that the reason these mistakes were made was, again, not an accident and at the direction of Pam Bondi.
And moreover, I would just say that what this proves, the fact that none of our Republican colleagues are here today. For Democrats, this is not a midterm campaign strategy. This is not about political gamesmanship or upsmanship, but clearly for them, fighting for the naming the Epstein files in their campaigning. The Epstein files, by the way, are real people. These are real people's lives, right? That was just purely political for them. As proven by their obstruction and by their defiance and their unwillingness to comply with legally binding subpoenas. And then finally, I would just say something that really just stayed with me today. There have been so many instances of insult to injury. Not only were vile acts committed by this vermin in their predator, pedophile Ponzi scheme that is a lifetime sentence for these survivors. This trauma is showing up and manifesting in their lives in so many ways. But it is insult to injury that there was an institutional betrayal by law enforcement, by the Department of Justice, and now today by House Republicans. And their rights were not honored in the Crime Victims' Rights Act. And the fact, as Congresswoman Randall speaks to, that their names have been unredacted. That was some of the most devastating testimony here today, this insult to injury. And in the words of Virginia Jeffrey, we need to know who the monsters are. We need to follow every single road. We don't care if they're Democrat, Republican, independent, what state they live in, what their job is, if they're a politician, if they're a president, or if even they are a prince. We will follow all roads because this is not political for us. This is deeply personal. This is about these survivors and their families. And every monster, in the words of Virginia Jeffrey, needs to be named and shamed because they could still be out there committing these evil, vile acts.
Last question.
I just want to know if former state attorney, Mr. Fisher, if he's been invited to testify, and what could his testimony yield in the public?
What I can say is that we have invited some former Florida officials to testify voluntarily. That has yet to happen, and so we are prepared to compel testimony in the future. That's something that we're looking at right now. Thank you very much.
But we're here today because it is right here, folks, right here in Palm Beach County, more than 20 years ago, that the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's horrific crimes were first denied justice with devastating results. In 2005, the Palm Beach Police Department, led by then Chief Michael Ryder, I'm giving him a shout out, a good guy, he uncovered a deeply disturbing pattern of predatory sexual abuse by Jeffrey Epstein and his associates, targeting women, of course, and young girls, many recruited from our local high schools right here in Palm Beach County. The police did their job. They listened to the survivors. They built a serious case. Then they brought it to then State Attorney Barry Krischer. I call his name because his succeeding prosecutors are not involved. But instead of filing charges, was it overwhelmed by the power, by the wealth? He sent the case to a grand jury where prosecutors shockingly minimized the abuse, limited the witnesses, and treated vulnerable young girls as if they were criminals. And you can read that grand jury testimony yourself. At the urging of Krischer's prosecutors, the grand jury returned just one count against Epstein, and it is jaw-dropping solicitation of prostitution, punishable by up to 60 days in jail. How crazy and wrong, an abomination, if you ask me. Disappointed and alarmed, Chief Ryder took the case to federal authorities, and what followed was more shock and awe to the justice system. In 2008, as we've heard, Acosta approved the secret, shameful, non-prosecution deal without notifying the survivors, and then sent the case back to Palm Beach County. Epstein was allowed to plead guilty to solicitation of prostitution, solicitation for a minder for prostitution. Really? That was that? And then he got an 18-month sentence, which he served about 13 months, federal immunity from prosecution here in South Florida, immunity for unnamed co-conspirators, and work relief privileges. Listen to this. He had work relief privileges that allowed him to leave the jail each day to continue his systematic sexual exploitation of women and girls. And the most troubling also, a deal was hidden from the public, and the full extent didn't come to light until reporting from the Miami Herald and the Palm Beach Post, who brought the fight to bring the grand jury records into the open. Justice was denied without explanation, and listen, I'm hoping as we move forward, these local prosecutors must be subpoenaed and they must be questioned under oath. Because I think they know the secret. So these survivors were abused first by a predator and then failed by a justice system that too often protected wealth and power over vulnerable women and children. And let's be clear, folks, had prosecutors in Florida done their jobs, most likely hundreds of young women might have been spared unimaginable harm. So we're here again. We're going to continue to ask the questions that should have been answered years ago. Why was Jeffrey Epstein, a serial predator who used his wealth and influence to exploit underage girls, given little more than a slap of the wrist? Who else should be held accountable? And what must we continue to do to make sure this never happens again? We owe the survivors and the public the answers and more. And with that, I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We're going to, of course, hear some opening testimony from survivors and advocates who will speak about the failure of our justice system to protect them, others, and certainly to hold Epstein and so many others accountable. They're going to each provide some opening remarks. I do want to introduce them briefly. We're going to hear from Danny Bensky, who is an advocate, dance, teaching artist, choreographer, and Epstein survivor. As an educator of the arts, Danny's advocacy derives from creating a safer world for her students and future generations. She is a public speaker and hopes that by sharing her story, we can get an inside perspective into grooming and how abuse can happen and how systems fail people. Danny was abused by Jeffrey Epstein in 2004 and 2005 when she was just 17 years old and working as a dancer in New York City. She has since spoken out about the government's handling of the case and has pursued legal action. And of course, the amount of courage is incredible. And I want to thank, of course, Danny for being here. We'll also hear from Rosa. Rosa is testifying under her first name and under that name only, just for her own safety. She was recruited in Uzbekistan by a modeling agent, co-conspirator, and brought to the U.S. with promises of a career. She met Jeffrey Epstein in 2009 and was abused over several years. With her immigration status used to keep her from leaving, Rosa is a fighter, a coach, a wife, and a stepmother. And her courage, of course, is immense, and we want to thank Rosa for being here. We're going to hear from Courtney Wild, who was abused by Jeffrey Epstein in Palm Beach beginning at the age of 14. Courtney is a mom, advocate, and survivor. She later brought a lawsuit against the federal government over the non-prosecution agreement that allowed Epstein to avoid federal charges. And she will speak about its lasting impact on survivors. We're also going to hear from Jenna Lisa Jones, who was abused by Jeffrey Epstein in Florida when she was 14 years old. She has spoken publicly about her experience and about her disappointment with the failure to fully release information related to this case. She is a mom, a wife, and a founding survivor of Survivors, Inc. We're going to also hear from Spencer Kuvin, who is an attorney who represented some of the earliest survivors to come forward against Epstein, and he has spent years advocating on behalf of victims. He will speak about the failures in the original prosecution and the impact those failures have had on survivors. We'll also hear from Lauren Hirsch, who's a former prosecutor and an advocate working to combat trafficking and exploitation. She will discuss the ongoing efforts by survivors and advocates to seek accountability and justice. We will also hear from Maria Farmer by video, who's the first person to report Jeffrey Epstein's abuse to authorities in 1996. She'll be providing video testimony. Finally, Sky and Amanda Roberts are here. We all, of course, know their incredible courage, and they'll be reading a brief statement as well. We will continue, of course, to honor Virginia's memory, her legacy, and her tireless fight for justice. I want to especially thank the witnesses for being here and for your enormous courage. You are doing, obviously, a service, not just to all of the women and girls that have suffered, but to every single American woman and American girl in this country who need to be believed and who need to know that when they report a horror against them, that their government is going to believe them and is going to stand up for them. And so thank you for your courage today. I now am going to hear a video that Maria Farmer wanted folks to hear about. And so we're going to go ahead and play that. So Ms.
My
Farmer,
name is Maria Farmer. I am the whistleblower